Hi guys, so tonight's flip lesson is on the beginnings of World War II, and a lot of this is going to be review from previous years. So we're going to get started on Hitler's rise to power and how he takes over much of Europe. After World War II, Germany is severely punished under the Treaty of Versailles, but Hitler feels that this doesn't really apply to him. He starts off by rebuilding Germany's military, and then he decides that he's going to invade Austria unless Austrian Nazis are given prominent government positions. And after that, he announces the unification of Germany and Austria, and then further claims the Sudetenland, which is an area of Czechoslovakia that has a large German-speaking population. And after each of these things, the League of Nations' only response was a mild condemnation. Oh no, Hitler, that's not very nice. You shouldn't do that. Eventually, Europe has to respond to him, and they respond to him at the Munich Conference in 1938. Britain, France, Germany, and Italy meet in Munich, Germany to discuss this crisis in Czechoslovakia, and they come up with the Munich Pact, which is an agreement amongst these powers to allow Hitler to annex the Sudetenland as long as he promises to just stop there. Obviously, we know Hitler is Hitler, and so that's not really going to happen. What this really is, ladies and gentlemen, is that although we believe we have peace in our time, it's really more appeasement. It is giving in to an aggressor to keep peace. And sure enough, Hitler did exactly what you think Hitler's going to do. He invades Czechoslovakia, and then 6 months after that, he invades Poland. Hitler needs some friends to be able to go on his worldwide tour, and the first of these is the Soviet Union. He makes a pact with Stalin to agree that they will not attack each other in the event of war. Hitler does this because he doesn't really want to have a two-front war, and Stalin knows that his country is not ready to defend itself against Germany. So they're not really friends, they're more like frenemies. On the other side, you have the Rome-Berlin axis between Hitler and Benito Mussolini. This is an alliance between these two countries under what they called the Pact of Steel. And then it gets a third strand of power with the Tripartite Pact, or the Three Power Pact, when Japan joins in 1940, which creates the Axis powers, which we'll talk a lot more about next class. War begins officially on September 3rd, 1939, when Britain finally feels like they've seen enough and they're not going to put up with this guy anymore. But this is actually the beginning of what is known as the Phony War. Britain declares war on September 3rd, 1939, and then nothing happens until April of 1940. So for like 8 months, nothing's going on. Both sides are prepping for war, but there's not a lot of war actually happening. Now we need to talk about the Blitzkrieg, and that is actually a German form of attack that is a lightning war. That's what Blitzkrieg means. And a lightning war, it is surprise attacks, it's rapid advances, it is massive air attack that then is followed up by ground troops, and it is a very fast, very sudden, very destructive, like lightning, form of attack. And this is Germany's favorite form of attack during World War II. And this is what they're going to use on their next focus, which is on France. France, after World War I, had built up something known as the Maginot Line, and this was designed to be a defense against aggressors, specifically Germany from World War I. These were concrete fortifications and tank obstacles and all kinds of things meant to keep the Germans out. However, this was not as well designed as the French had thought, because if you guys can see the map up on the right-hand side, Germany figured out the easy way around it, which was just going through the area that wasn't really well defended. And so they went into France, and France was invaded and taken over in only 39 days. Germany bypassed the Maginot Line and created Vichy France in the top part, the northern part of France. This was a French government controlled by Germany. However, the southern part still called themselves Free France, and their leadership actually fled and was based off in England, where it was safe for them. They were going to be led by this guy right here, Charles de Gaulle, who is like the George Washington of France. They absolutely adore this guy. Now, when it comes to the United States, where is the United States in all of this? We have decided that we are going to be neutral. Because the US entered the Great War so late, we were the only country that came out of World War I with a stable economy. The Roaring Twenties solidified this as we grew in power and in influence. But then the Great Depression hit, and it tanked the US economy, and the effects of that were felt worldwide. During this time, America retreats into isolationism. We did not want to be involved in other countries because we didn't want to get sucked into other wars. We didn't want to have to spend money that we didn't have to because remember, we're still suffering from the Depression. However, we are going to have to do something about this war. We can't just ignore it. And so we declare ourselves neutral. Between 1935 and 37, we make a series of acts that officially state America's neutrality in the European conflict in order to ensure that the United States does not become entangled again in these foreign conflicts. In 1935, it's just a general embargo on war materials against everyone who's involved in a war. In 1936, they go ahead and they add in the forbidding of all loans and credits to any countries that are in war. In 1937, they go then one step further from that, which says that U.S. ships were not allowed to transport passengers or articles to any of these countries that were in war. But the problem of all of this is that it made no distinction between the aggressor and the victim, treating both sides equally as belligerents, which means that although France and Great Britain are going to be attacked by Germany, we cannot help them because they are in a war. They are a belligerent in a war. And so it kind of ties our hands. We do want to help them, but there's not much we can do. Now, this is also going to be kind of connected to a speech made by our president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in 1941. At the State of the Union address, FDR gave a speech in which he described 4 essential freedoms that the world should all enjoy. And so these are the 4 freedoms: the freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. These are later going to be included in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights after World War II is over. But these 4 pictures by Norman Rockwell really illustrate these ideals as important ones for the world. They are American ideals, but they are worldwide ideals as well. Now, what's going on while we decide to be neutral? Well, poor Britain is all alone. France has fallen, Poland has fallen, everybody's gone except for except for England. And England has a new prime minister, the very angry, very stubborn Winston Churchill. And he is actually going to be a perfect person for this job. Hitler believes that because Britain is alone, they're just going to surrender. They're going to fall to pieces. But he did not anticipate the bravery of the British people or the stubbornness of their prime minister, Winston Churchill.
But if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
So that voice that you just heard is the voice of Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill was, like I said, a great person for this role because he was the person to really inspire the British people to survive through these months and months and months of air raids by the Germans. This was definitely a lot of blitz attacks done by the Germans. So America is now seeing our best friends being attacked by these terrible Germans, and we feel like we need to do something. So we find ways to get around our neutrality. The first of these is cash and carry. The Cash and Carry Act allowed the sale of materials to these belligerent nations as long as they arranged for the transport using their own ships and paid immediately in cash, assuming all risk in the transportation. So, cash and carry. The next is the destroyers for bases. This allowed us to transfer 50 mothballed destroyers from the United States Navy in exchange for land rights on British possessions. We could get military land on British territories. Again, very straightforward. And the final way that we were able to help the Allies without necessarily taking sides was through the Lend-Lease Act. And this allowed the United States to supply the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, Free France, and the other allied nations with materials as long as the materials were leased from us. We lended it to them to borrow or to lease it until it was time for their return or for their destruction. And finally, we get the final act of American ties to Great Britain, and that is the Atlantic Charter. This was a treaty of friendship between the United States and Great Britain after the Blitzkrieg and the Battle of Britain. This stated the ideal goals of the war. It was fashioned after Wilson's 14 points, showing that there should be fairness and equality amongst these nations, that there needs to be freedom of the seas and free trade and all these other things that we had stated under Wilson's 14 points. And the agreement proved to be a very important step in the creation of the United Nations after the war would be over. But what this really truly does is it solidifies the United States on the side of the Allies before we officially join into the war. So what we're going to be looking at in class is we're going to be looking at how America actually is brought into this war. At this point, we have no real reason to get involved. So what is going to be happening that actually officially draws us into war? And so that's what we'll be covering next class, and I will see you guys soon.